And hello, everyone. Let's do this. David Horton here, proud to be one of your pastors. We'll be going through Daniel chapter 10 through half of Daniel 11. Let me share my screen. Boom. Boom. So we are in Daniel week 7. Wow. So friends, next week is the final week of this study, okay? And then we're done, all right? After Daniel's really weird psychedelic trip that we'll get through, I'm just gonna leave you hanging. All right, we'll be done after next week. I'll go ahead and put out a plug. I'll be co-teaching with our senior pastor, Tom, a little study in the month of Advent, and that'll be really fun. We'll be going through the nativity story according to Matthew. And then I'll be teaching myself on the book of Revelation again, starting in January of next year, just because I really enjoyed it. I want to teach it again. And a lot of folks have expressed interest in it. So that's my shameless plug for those two studies. As a review, we are halfway through Daniel's 4 visions. These are apocalyptic visions. Apocalyptic literature shares a few themes. This dualistic view of reality where you have a heavenly realm and an earthly realm. God is in control of all history. There are things that have happened in history that have led up, that explains up what has happened to this point. And then in apocalyptic literature, the person who receives this vision is told what's going to happen next. Usually apocalyptic literature comes in at the end of an era, at the end of some kind of time. There was a beginning of this era, end of the era. The apocalyptic vision is like right before the end, and God is telling the person who gets the vision what's just about to happen. Not a long time from now, but in a short while. Also, apocalyptic literature is meant to give hope to people who are going through times of oppression, persecution, and suffering. Okay, so we had these. We've been through 2 of these visions already, Daniel chapter 7 and chapter 8. Excuse me. I wanted to show you kind of the meanings of these. So in the we saw with the 4 beasts and the ancient one. This meaning here, the kingdoms of the world will fail. Daniel sees these beasts rise out of the sea. Each beast represents a kingdom that have oppressed the people of God. All those kingdoms will fail. The ancient one, the ancient of days, will come and inaugurate the kingdom of God on earth. Jesus gets the idea of the kingdom of God from Daniel. The kingdoms of the world will fail, but God's kingdom will endure forever. That's Daniel 7. Then we looked at Daniel 8 with the ram and the goat, the ram symbolizing the empires that came out of Persia, the goat being the Greek Empire. The big meaning there was God will intervene and end this current time of suffering. So we looked at this last week where with this goat here, the Greek Empire that suppressed Judaism in Jerusalem. That's where Daniel is actually writing. At the end of that vision, God steps in. God steps in and finally puts an end to what's happening in Jerusalem with the oppression of the Jews. We also went through the end of chapter 9 last week, where we looked at the 70 weeks. Daniel is going through Bible study. I just love that. He's studying here in Daniel 9, Jeremiah chapter 29, where Jeremiah tells the exiles, hey, you're going to be in exile for 70 years. Well, Daniel's looking around and going, it's been longer than 70 years, buddy. What's going on? And he really wrestles with scripture. He doesn't understand what this means. And the real big meaning there is that this time of suffering is long, but it's not forever. It's not forever. Daniel 9 to me reads a lot like what I wish someone had told me at the very beginning of the pandemic. This is going to last a lot longer than you thought, buddy, but not forever. So please have hope. Then tonight we're starting the final vision. So this is the last chunk of Daniel. Okay, the very last chunk. This is the last vision he gets. It's a vision of the time of the end, not the end of all history, but the end of the era that Daniel is living in. And for the historical Daniel, who actually wrote the book, that's the time of suppression of Judaism in Jerusalem. Okay, I'm going to do a Zoom poll. I haven't done one of these in a while, so I really hope this works. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Let's see. Yes. I hope this works. Here goes nothing. Okay. Just answer, if you're seeing 3 questions, only answer question 1. Okay, just answer question 1. We'll get to the other questions in a few minutes. Nod your head if you could see this, please. Can you see this? Very good. So go ahead and answer the first question. When I hear the word resurrection, I imagine what? I imagine what? There's a reason I'm asking, of course, about resurrection. When I imagine the word when I hear the word resurrection, I imagine. Can you all see the poll? Yes. I'm not seeing anyone.
It looks like you have to answer all 3 before you can submit.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Then let's go ahead and do all of these. So thank you for that, chat. All right. So the first one, the vision of the time of the end will be about resurrection. So I want to hear your thoughts on resurrection. Then we're going to get to some angels tonight. So I want to know what you believe about angels. And then this final one, I'll explain that one as I wanted to end with this, but that's okay. Before the pandemic, how much did you know about the 1918 flu? Okay. There'll be a reason for that. But go ahead and answer those 3 questions for me. Sorry for the confusion there. I thought we could just do one at a time. Lesson learned for next week. We'll give it a few more seconds. Y'all are almost done. I see on my screen how many have participated so far. Okay, going once, going twice. One more person. Boom, we hit 100%. All right. In poll and share results. Now, so when we get to the end of this vision, we will be talking about resurrection. Daniel offers the most clear vision of resurrection in the Old Testament. There's a little bit in the prophet Ezekiel, but the most resurrection you get in the Old Testament comes from Daniel. So I wanted to hear what y'all hear about when you hear about resurrection. All of these were correct answers, but most of you are really interested in seeing God face to face. So am I, by the way. I would have answered God's eternal rule on earth. That's me. But Daniel would imagine all of these. All of these heaven, seeing God face to face, seeing my loved ones, God's victory over evil, God's eternal rule on earth, and bodies that cannot die. All of those are accurate to our theology of resurrection. So thank you. We're going to get to some angels in this final vision. So what do you believe about angels? So most of you believe that angels exist and directly influence the course of events on earth. I find that to be fascinating. And no one believes angels don't exist. Okay, very good, very good. I would answer, don't know. Angels, I am not that educated on, I know about the angels in the Bible, but like I struggle with angels actually quite a bit. So thank you for that. Daniel would answer this first one, exist and directly influence the course of events on earth. Most of y'all here, 79% of you here are very apocalyptic people, okay? It's very apocalyptic to think that angels are directly influencing what's going on here. And finally, before the pandemic, how much did you know about the 1918 flu? Almost half of you say you had heard of it, but knew very little. 4 of you had never heard of it. That's very interesting. Another 4 had totally forgotten about it. And then the next one would be knew a modest amount. The reason I asked that question is because towards the end, we'll consider why Daniel is doing what he's doing in the final vision. A lot of it is reminding his little corner of Israel about their own history when they have forgotten. They had forgotten their own story. And I had thought when I was preparing tonight's lesson, goodness, if I had known more about the 1918 flu, I would have known what to expect here. I wish I had a Daniel when all this broke out to really explain to me what we were in for by educating me on the 1918 flu. So we'll come back to all that. Thank you for doing that. We learned a little bit more about Zoom polls, sharing screen. Now we're back. Daniel chapter 10, verses 1 through 9. If you have questions, as always, please put them in the chat and I'll be paying attention. In the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. Remember, that's his Babylonian name. He understood the word, having received understanding in the vision. At that time, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 weeks. I had eaten no rich food, no meat or wine had entered my mouth, and I had not anointed myself at all for the first 3 weeks. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I looked up and saw a man clothed in linen, with a belt of gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, like looking in a mirror, just kidding. And the sound of his words like the roar of a multitude. I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. The people who were with me did not see the vision, though a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone to see this great vision. My strength left me, and my complexion grew deathly pale, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and when I heard the sound of his words, I fell into a trance, face to the ground. Okay, what's going on here? So we have actually gone back in time a little bit from last week's lesson. Daniel chapter 9 was in the 1st year of Darius, son of Ahasuerus. I always struggle with that one. So that would have been in the year 522. Excuse me. We have actually gone back in time to the first king of Persia, King Darius, like the 4th or 5th king of Persia, I forget which. King Cyrus was the first king of Persia. It's the year 536 BC in this chapter here. So why is Daniel mourning? He's fasting, right? He's had no rich food, no meat, no wine. He hasn't even properly bathed himself. That's what the whole anointing is about. There are at least 2 reasons why he's mourning. It could just be something he does at the beginning of every new year. This is the first month in the Jewish calendar. So perhaps it's Daniel's custom to mourn for all of his people in the Jewish diaspora who have just been kicked out of their homeland. And he does this at the beginning of every new year. He fasts for his people every year. That could be what it is. We kind of do that in the month of Advent. That's like it's the first few weeks of our Christian year, and we kind of call it kind of a fast. Or it could be that he knows that the exiles who have returned to Jerusalem by this point are struggling to rebuild the temple. This is what the books of Ezra and Nehemiah are about. The prophet Nahum is about this as well. And I'm sorry, not Nahum, Haggai. King Cyrus in the year 539, he sends some of the exiles from Persia to Jerusalem to actually rebuild the temple. They can have their temple back, they just can't have their king back. They have to work for the king of Persia. And they struggle for 15 years to build that stupid thing. I'm sorry, not that stupid thing, that darn thing. It takes them a long time to build it. And maybe Daniel has heard that it's taken them a long time, and he's fasting on their behalf. So an angel appears while he's fasting. Okay. Maybe this is Gabriel. What's interesting is Daniel never names who this angel is. We just kind of assume it's the angel Gabriel. He's with other people, right? We see here in verse 7, I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. The people who were with me did not see it. So he's with other people, but only he can see it. So this reminds me of Saul. Remember, before we called him Paul, he was Saul on the road to Damascus. Saul's on his way to Damascus, and he has a troop of Roman soldiers with him, and Jesus appears, and only Paul can see him. None of these others can. They know something happened. They see a blinding light, like these people do, and they faint just like these people do, but only Paul can hear Jesus, and only Daniel can see Gabriel. Daniel passes out, he faints. Methinks it's a little bit because he's fasting. He has low blood sugar. he also sees this terrifying sight of this angel. He faints. So the combination of very low blood sugar and seeing this angel, he passes out. Wouldn't you? I know I would. Okay, verses 10 through 14. But then a hand touched me and roused me to my hands and knees. He said to me, Daniel, greatly beloved, pay attention to the words that I am going to speak to you. Stand on your feet, for I have now been sent to you. So while he was speaking this word to me, I stood up, trembling. He said to me, do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me 21 days. So Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I left him there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia, and I've come to help you understand what is to happen to your people at the end of days. There is a further vision for those days. Okay. So what makes Daniel greatly beloved? I love this. Verse 11, Daniel greatly beloved, pay attention to the words that I'm going to speak to you. See, and then in verse 12, for from the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding. So Daniel has always wanted to gain understanding of God and from God, right? And to humble yourself before God. So what makes Daniel so greatly beloved? What makes him so great? I just love that Gabriel tells him, you have always been trying to search and wrestle with this stuff. You've been trying to gain understanding about God, and you've been humble, right? Those twin virtues of searching for wisdom and humility. Those are really the main virtues in Daniel, searching for wisdom and humility. I try to emulate that myself. So God has sent this angel, we think it's Gabriel, to Daniel, but he says, I was held up by this prince of Persia. What's that about? So this is not the earthly prince of Persia. This isn't King Cyrus. This is not a human person. It's the patron angel of Persia. So what's that about? This is apocalyptic literature. And what it assumes is that every nation has its own kind of patron angel, right? So in Catholic theology, there are patron saints, right? And you can invoke a patron saint for something, or even a patron angel. Some people actually, many Catholics do believe there is a patron angel they can invoke upon for different situations. Similar situation, except that it's not that individual people can claim a patron angel, but nations can, people groups can. Okay, and further, going with apocalyptic literature, that patron angel is the heavenly correspondent of that nation in heaven. So therefore, this prince of Persia here is supposed to represent Persia in heaven. So there's a Persia here on earth. What does that look like in the heavenly realm? There's an angel that represents that. Okay, so therefore, what we see as a war between two nations on earth is actually two angels in heaven duking it out. So that's what we have here. Looks like this angel was at war with this patron angel of Persia up in the heavenly places, and it looked like a war down here on earth between two nations. That war here on earth looked like the Persian army was winning it, but now the patron angel of Israel has stepped in, Michael. So Michael is supposed to represent Israel up in the heavenly places. Now Michael is battling Persia, and it looks like they are kind of locked in battle. Okay, so that's what all this prince of these kingdoms, prince of Persia mean. They are angels that are playing out in heaven what nations are doing here on earth. Verse 14 here, for there is a further vision for those days. Again, it's the end of these days, this era here, not all days. Okay, verses 15 through 21. While he was speaking these words to me, this is Daniel talking, I turned my face toward the ground and was speechless. Then one in human form touched my lips, and I opened my mouth to speak, and said to the one who stood before me, my Lord, because of the vision, such pains have come upon me that I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For I am shaking, no strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. Again, one in human form touched me and strengthened me. He said, do not fear, greatly beloved, you are safe. Be strong and courageous. When he spoke to me, I am strengthened and said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, do you know why I have come to you? Now I must return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I am through with him, the prince of Greece will come. But I am to tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is no one with me who contends against these princes, except Michael, your prince. Okay, thus the end of chapter 10. So this is the only time in Daniel where Daniel actually resists a vision. So up here to verses 16 and 17. Because of this vision, I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant, myself, talk with my Lord? I am shaking. Daniel is almost saying no to having this vision. It's just such a, it's so weighty, it's so powerful. Go ahead and break it to you. It's because Gabriel will end up spelling out what is to happen at the end of this era. There's just so much for Daniel. He actually resists it. The one time Daniel is actually resisting what God is doing in his life, and of course God will triumph there. The Gabriel says, "Be strong and courageous." That is an echo from somewhere else in Scripture. Go ahead and put it in the chat if you know where. Dun, dun, dun. Don't Google it. There's always the temptation. Google it. Wonder if anyone knows where that comes from. We'll come back to that. I'll keep note in the chat. He says, once I have dealt with the prince of Persia, the prince of Greece is coming. So what does that mean? Well, since these angels correspond to nations here in the earthly places, what that means is whoever Gabriel is supposed to represent, they're going to conquer Persia. So Persia is going to lose. The angel in heaven and here on earth, Persia is going to lose. Okay? But then the prince of Greece will come. So that means in the heavenly places, the prince of Greece is going to wage war on Michael, the patron angel of Israel. And what that's going to look like here in the earthly places is the Greek Empire will be waging war against Israel. Okay? And it looks like there is no one who can contend against these princes except Michael, your prince. What that means is there is no hope against these empires except Israel. Nobody can withstand them, which is a kind of it takes a lot of moxie to say. Israel is this teeny tiny nation that has been conquered so many times, just a nation of exiles by this point. And Gabriel's saying, there's no one who can fight these empires except you, few thousand people of God who have been conquered time and time and again. Y'all are God's only hope here. Okay, let me check the chat. Was it to Joseph? Was it to Moses? No, it was Joshua. It was Joshua. Very good, Joan. Moses tells Joshua, be strong and courageous. Moses knows that he cannot cross the promised land, but it's Joshua. It's up to Joshua to do it. Okay, and so when Gabriel tells Daniel to be strong and courageous, it's like he's telling Daniel, be like Joshua. When you had to lead your people to a new place, that's what you're doing, Daniel. You're going to have to lead the people who listen to you. When you tell them this vision, you're going to have to lead them to be strong and courageous. There is a book of, look here in verse 21, but I am to tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There's a book of truth that this angel has been sent to interpret for Daniel. The book of truth is supposed to represent the events that are supposed to unfold at the end of time. Now, again, this isn't the end of all time. It's the end of this time in Israel's history, this era. This book here contains what that is, what the end is supposed to look like. There's a parallel in the book of Revelation for this. So when John of Patmos in Revelation is carried up into heaven to see what's going on up there in his visions, there's a scroll that the Lamb, Jesus, is only the Lamb is allowed to open up this scroll, and this scroll contains what is to happen at the end of time. Very similar idea here. So that Zoom poll here was what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear y'all's thoughts on angels. Y'all are angel believers. It's great. Me too. They just confused me. Okay, warning, chapter 11, we're gonna go actually kind of quickly through a lot of it. Not here at the beginning, but later on. So chapter 11, verses 1 through 4. As for me, so the me here is Gabriel. So Daniel is not talking in the first person here. Gabriel is talking in the first person. As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, so the angel talking, I stood up to support and strengthen him. Now I will announce the truth to you. 3 more kings shall arise in Persia. The 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a warrior king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and take action as he pleases. And while he was still rising in power, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted and go to others besides these. I'm actually going to pause there. this angel, Gabriel, will be the narrator for most of the rest of the book of Daniel. Daniel himself won't speak again until next week. So the angel is talking in first person. So this angel, Gabriel, he supports Darius the Mede. Now, last week it was a little confusing. There were two Dariuses in Daniel. One we know historically existed, who was a king of Persia. This is the Darius the Mede, who we know historically didn't exist. But I think it refers to someone who did exist. I think it refers to Cyrus the Great, okay, the first king of Persia. This angel says, I supported this guy. I interpret him as Cyrus. I supported him. Why would this angel support a Persian king? Well, it makes sense if this is Cyrus the Great, because it was Cyrus the Great who allowed the exiles of Judah to return home. Back when Nebuchadnezzar took over Jerusalem, it looked like the exiles would never return home. Cyrus the Great allows them to return home and get to working on that beloved temple. Okay, and it looks like in heaven, Cyrus the Great had angelic support for that. I supported that happening. So these four kings of Persia, the angel is telling him there'll be four kings of Persia to rise up, who were going to rise up, and then finally a warrior king from Greece will rise up. Well, we know from history that there were more than four kings of Persia. There were many more than that, actually. I had to do some homework and digging on this. These four kings are supposed to be a metaphor for just the rest of Persia's kings. Kind of like in our culture, we have things in threes. That's supposed to represent the totality of things. In that culture, you have things in fours, and that represents the totality of things. So that's the rest of Persia's kings, and this last one who comes will be richer than them all. But then here in verse 3, a warrior king shall rise up. That's supposed to be Alexander the Great, who takes over all the known world, the Greek king, establishes the Greek Empire. His kingdom will be broken up. Historically, it is broken up into four kingdoms. None of them will remotely resemble what Alexander the Great had. They all kind of mess it up for. I want to show you this map. So this is the map of the remaining Greek empires. This map is supposed to represent what it looked like in 275 BC. Daniel was written a little more than 100 years after this, but this is close to what Daniel would have known. So Alexander the Great conquered everything from way over here all the way to over here to what is almost in India. In Daniel's time, the Seleucid Empire here, this reddish color, would have control over Palestine. Okay, kind of keep this map in mind, particularly where this green part and this red part meet in Palestine. They will constantly over time battle for who has control over Palestine. And in Daniel's time when he's writing, the Seleucids, the red part, they had control over Palestine. Okay, verses 5 through 9. Again, the angel talking. Then the king of the south shall grow strong, but one of his officers shall grow stronger than he, and shall rule a realm greater than his own realm. After some years they shall make an alliance. The daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to ratify the agreement, but she shall not retain her power, and his offspring shall not endure. She shall be given up, she and her attendants, and her child, and the one who supported her. In those times, a branch from her roots shall rise up in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall take action against them and prevail. Even their gods, with their idols and with their precious vessels and of silver and gold, he shall carry off to Egypt, spoils of war. For some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall invade the realm of the king of the south, but will return to his own land. Now, that was incredibly confusing when I read it the first time too. So the king, let's go back to this map. So this is almost the world that Daniel knows. So the kings of the north represent the kings of the Seleucid Empire up here, the reddish. Kings of the south represent the kings of the empire in green, the Ptolemaic Empire. This is, all of these people are Greek speaking who come from what is now the land of Greece today. When we talk about the Greek Empire, they all were bound by a Greek culture, but they were ruled by different families, different kind of aristocracies. And they were really, by the time Daniel was writing, there were two main ones. The Seleucids up to the north, Ptolemaic up to down to the south. The Seleucids have, this huge swath of land from what is now Iran and Pakistan and Afghanistan, Iraq, all the way through Syria, Lebanon. The Ptolemaic Empire has Egypt. It's an incredible source of wealth. Okay. Those two kingdoms, bound by a similar culture and language, Greek, are constantly at war with one another. And they make peace through these marriage arrangements. So that's what we see through here in this passage, and what we're going to see for the rest of the night, right? So you have these people at war with one another, and then they marry one another. And then they're at war with one another, and then they marry one another, right? They're making these peace arrangements through marriage. So like, for me, this is like Game of Thrones, if you were ever into the Game of Thrones, or The Sopranos. This is the mob. These families at war with one another, and then they marry one another and make a truce. This is The Godfather. If we were down in Mexico, this is the cartels. This is exactly how the cartels operate. To Jews, or Daniel's time, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, they call themselves kings. To the Jews, they're more like cartels, right? These extremely wealthy families, always at war with one another, kidnapping people. They control the economy, rule with kind of brute force. And the little people going about their daily life, they're the ones who suffer, right? Those are the Jews, right? Very similar situation to what we have actually in Mexico. So just the complicated relationship between these two families, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, right? Kind of like the Montagues and Capulets in Romeo and Juliet. That's what we're seeing for most of the rest of this chapter. All right. So here's verses 10 through 19. So his son shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall advance like a flood and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. That's the families in the north. Moved with rage, the king of the south shall go out and do battle against the king of the north. He shall muster a great multitude, which shall, however, be defeated by his enemy. When the multitude had been carried off, his heart shall be exalted, but he shall overthrow tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude larger than the former, and after some years he shall advance with a great army and abundant supplies. So here it looks like the king of the north, the Seleucids, are winning this bout. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south. The lawless among your own people, we'll come back to that part, shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city. And the forces of the south shall not stand, not even his picked troops, for there shall be no strength to resist. What that means is the Ptolemy family in Egypt, they're losing. Verse 16. But he who comes against him shall take the actions he pleases, and no one shall withstand him. He shall take a position in the beautiful land. We'll come back to that too. And all of it shall be in his power. He shall set his mind to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of peace and perform them. In order to destroy the kingdom, he shall give him a woman in marriage, another marriage pact, but it shall not succeed or be to his advantage. Afterward, he shall turn to the coastlands and shall capture many. But a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn back toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. So what's all happening here? This is just a kind of an intricate history of these wars, this constant warfare between these two families, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. A lot like Romeo and Juliet, two families at war. I want you to note that a lot of what we just read, all this conflict and war, it's happening in and around Palestine. Okay, what we now call today the nation of Israel and Gaza and the West Bank has been for thousands of years the turf of war, right? And most of it has been other kingdoms much larger than Israel duking it out on that land. So these two families, they're having battles in the Jews' backyard. And who's the one who loses? The Jews, the people of the land. They end up suffering the most. They have the most collateral damage. It's their farmland that's being burned and their homes being destroyed. They're just caught in the middle of these two wealthy families marrying one another, then going to war against one another. Here in verse 14, it says, the lawless among your own people shall lift themselves up. There must have been some Jews who wanted to side with the Seleucids, or the king of the north. Daniel doesn't look kindly on those of his own people, the Jews, who take sides with these families. He only looks kindly on those who stay neutral, who don't kind of taint their hands with the blood of these wars. He calls the people who take sides in these wars the lawless, kind of these, in his eyes, these apostates. The beautiful land here is supposed to be Israel. The last part of what we just read is where the Ptolemaic king in the south tries to take over Palestine, even builds a fortress in the beautiful land in Israel, but it doesn't work. He has to retreat. Okay, last passage we'll cover tonight. Verses 20 through 28. Then shall arise in his place, this is the king of the south, the Ptolemies, one who shall send an official for the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be broken, though not in anger or in battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person. I love that. I'd be interested if you can put this in the chat, how your translations translate that contemptible person piece. In his place shall arise a contemptible person on whom royal majesty had not been conferred. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom through intrigue. Armies shall be utterly swept away and broken before him, and the prince of the covenant as well. And after an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully and become strong with a small party. Without warning, he shall come with the richest parts of the province and do what none of his predecessors had ever done, lavishing plunder, spoil, and wealth on them. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and determination against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall wage war with a much greater and stronger army, but he shall not succeed. For plots shall be devised against him by those who eat of the royal rations. They shall break him, his army shall be swept away, and many shall fall slain. The two kings, their minds bent on evil, shall sit at one table and exchange lies. Love that part. But it shall not succeed, for there remains an end at the time appointed. He shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant. He shall work his will and return to his own land. All right, this is the last part we'll cover tonight. So this contemptible person is supposed to be the same king we've come back to every week in the study, King Antiochus IV Epiphanes of the Seleucid Empire. Okay, in this passage we see that he's a king of the north, so part of the Seleucid Empire, and the king of the south from Egypt, the Ptolemaic Empire, is at war with him and cannot win. King Antiochus cannot be beaten. They even they come to one table at one point and try to make a deal with one another. And this is like the Godfather, right? These two gangs coming together trying to make a deal, and they exchange lies, right? But it won't succeed. King Antiochus comes up on top. Looks like he overthrows, here in verse 22, armies shall be utterly swept away and broken before him, and the prince of the covenant as well. Who was that? That's supposed to be the high priest of the temple in Jerusalem. We know this in history. Actually, King Antiochus does essentially fire the high priest in the temple. He can do that. He overthrows the prince of the covenant. What he does is he expands the Seleucid Empire. He takes over Palestine and even marches on Egypt to the south. Okay, he sets his mind against the holy covenant. What's that? Here in verse 28, his heart shall be set against the holy covenant. What does that mean? The holy covenant is supposed to be the practice of Judaism in the temple, offering sacrifices at the right day, in keeping accordance with the law of Moses, following the Jewish festivals. All that is in the covenant. King Antiochus forbids it all, suppresses the practice of Judaism. He is a contemptible person. That last question in the Zoom poll. So I asked y'all how much you knew about the 1918 flu before the pandemic. And as I kind of expected, most people knew about the 1918 flu, but didn't know that much about it. And that's me. I didn't give it much thought until recently. I listened to a podcast recently, and I re-listened to it actually, about the 1918 flu and lessons we can learn from it to this day. I didn't know that more people died in the 1918 flu around the world than did in the entirety of World War I, even though that flu happened just after World War I. Here in Houston, we have Methodist Hospital because of the 1918 flu. It was created as a direct response to the flu. There were mask mandates then. There were the political parties of that day took stances on where they stood with vaccines and with like government shutdowns, right? That was a political football back then. I knew none of that. I knew absolutely none of that until last year. I wish somebody had explained that to me before 2020. I wish I knew all this. That's what Daniel is doing, right? So why is he telling all this history to his people? History that they're supposed to know. It's so that they can make sense of the present. Daniel's people are living under just this horrible time of suffering where they can't practice their religion. If they try to, they're going to be jailed or killed. His people have tried to take Jerusalem back to the Greeks. Then they lost epically, and the Greek army came in and just wiped them out, killed them. So Daniel is trying to explain their history back to them so that they can understand how they got in this horrible mess. I want you to see that nothing we have covered so far in chapters 10 and 11 is the future. It's already happened. It's already part of the past. When we hear the words like apocalypse and revelation, we go, oh, this is the future, right? That's what this angel has come to like tell Daniel the future. But he hasn't told any future. All of this has already happened. And Daniel's folks would have known this. This is quite literally ancient history to them. Okay. So why would Daniel go do all this work to teach them history? It's just simply to help them understand how they got here. Just like, wouldn't it be great if we all could have had a history lesson on the 1918 flu at the very beginning of the pandemic to help us explain how we got here? I just think it's so important for us to keep in mind that concerns about the future actually aren't as important as understanding how and why we got here. That helps us make sense of the present. Next week, I want you to finish the book. We're going to finish Daniel, okay? So we will pick up here in chapter 11, verse 29. complete chapter 11. Excuse me. And finish chapter 12. If you're looking at your Bible at chapter 12, you'll notice that it's quite short. Okay. And it covers the resurrection of the dead. All right. Stopping share, checking the chat for questions. Okay. Y'all are a great class. I appreciate y'all. If you have any questions or prayer requests, send me an email. If not, I'll see you next week.